Hello everyone, and welcome to part 2 of a series I called Jim Henson's Labyrinth, a complete examination in storytelling. Make sure you've seen part 1 of this examination so you're all up to speed. With that in mind, let's continue.
I've brought you a gift.
I'll get you, my pretty, and your little dog too.
It's no mistake that Labyrinth takes some inspiration from The Wizard of Oz. We can actually catch a glimpse of the book in Sarah's room at the beginning of the film. The Labyrinth is in no way a direct copy of The Wizard of Oz, but both stories do share certain elements. Our protagonist is a young woman who feels unappreciated and fantasizes about leaving her dreary life behind her. She encounters a magical man who can do things unlike any she's ever met. Using dubious means, the older man sets the young woman on a path which leads her to a wondrous land unlike anything she's ever seen before. The young woman encounters dangers of all sorts along her journey, but never gives up. She meets 3 companions along the way to her destination and slowly grows in maturity. Her newfound friends help her along the way, just as she does for them. At the end of her journey, she discovers that she had the power to return home from the very beginning, but never realized it.
What?
Upon returning home, she no longer takes her life for granted. Are there similarities between these 2 stories? Absolutely, but there are differences.
Why, it's just like you could read what was inside of me.
I want us to take a look at the protagonists from each story, Dorothy and Sarah. Dorothy is a young farm girl that does not appear to come from a wealthy family. She is presented to us as someone who is wholesome but naive. When she arrives home, the first thing she does is begin telling her Aunt Emily what horrible thing Mrs. Gulch did to Toto. Toto is Dorothy's dog. Mrs. Gulch is the wife of the man who owns half the county. As Dorothy is venting her frustrations, Aunt Em and Uncle Henry are busy taking care of the chicks. Aunt Em tells Dorothy that they are busy.
And now she says she's going to get the servant.
Dorothy, we're busy.
All right.
After this, Dorothy attempts to vent her frustrations to Hunk, Hickory, and Zeke. Zeke tells her that he's too busy, and Hunk tells her that she should avoid going by Mrs. Gulch's home. When she's given this advice, she responds by saying,
Punk, you just won't listen, that's all.
As the story continues, Dorothy sings a song called Over the Rainbow. The song informs the audience that Dorothy dreams of going to a land far away from her troubles in Kansas. According to the lyrics of the song, she feels as though nobody understands her and that her problems will disappear somewhere over the rainbow. Later, when Mrs. Gulch arrives at her home to take Toto away, Dorothy replies to Mrs. Gulch by insisting Toto didn't do anything wrong. She says that it's her fault, not Toto's fault.
I mean, too, he didn't know he was doing anything wrong. I'm the one that ought to be punished.
So what do you think? Is she being responsible here? Well, you'd be mistaken. She's actually not being responsible, and I'll explain why. Earlier in the story, Dorothy admits to her aunt and uncle that Toto goes into Mrs. Gulch's garden twice a week.
Oh, but he doesn't do it every day, just once or twice a week.
Dorothy confesses that this is a repeated behavior for Toto that she allows. We also learn from Hunk that Dorothy could easily take a different route home, which wouldn't require her to go by Mrs. Gulch's residence.
When you come home, don't go by Miss Gulch's place. Then Toto won't get in her garden, and you won't get in no trouble, see?
Mrs. Gulch is right to be angry with Dorothy, but it could be argued that Mrs. Gulch is going too far by trying to take away Dorothy's dog. Regardless, Dorothy is in the wrong and only attempts to take responsibility for her actions when she thinks something bad is about to happen to her dog. Now let's talk about Sarah. She is presented to the audience as a young suburban girl who lives in a nice home, has nice clothes, and seems to come from a wealthier background. Her stepmom wants her to grow up and go out on dates, but Sarah doesn't. Sarah wants to be seen as an independent young woman, but is not. Instead, she rehearses lines from one of her favorite books, pretends to portray herself as a woman who fights for what she believes in but can never remember the last line. She apologizes to her stepmother when she arrives home late, but isn't sincere.
I said I'm sorry.
She apologizes because she doesn't want to be reprimanded, not because she is genuinely apologetic. Both Dorothy and Sarah lack responsibility for their actions. They both feel as though nobody will listen to them, dream of fantastical lands to run away to, and both of them take things for granted. Sarah wants to be seen as an adult. She displays this by wearing makeup and changing the tone of her voice in an attempt to sound more mature. We also hear her curse, which could be seen as either her trying to act more mature or a small indicator that Sarah doesn't believe cursing to be a bad thing. Dorothy is very different than Sarah in that sense. She is not the type to curse, nor is she the type to dress up as someone she isn't. Dorothy isn't concerned with her appearances and does not desire others to view her as a mature woman. She is comfortable within her own skin and does not feel the need to pretend to be someone other than who she is.
I have a feeling we're not in Kansas anymore.
Although Dorothy and Sarah are both transported to magical lands, they experience something different from one another. These two young women go on similar journeys, but that does not mean that they are the same character. However, both of them do represent the same archetype. One of the resources where we can learn about this archetype is through the works of Carl Jung. He's a Swiss psychiatrist and psychoanalyst that's considered to be one of our fathers of modern-day psychology. The innocent or maiden archetype craves happiness and are easily impressed just as often as they are easily disappointed. They are daydreamers and childlike in their behavior. They tend to romanticize situations and are overly optimistic. They care for other people's well-being and often attempt to help those who they perceive as helpless or in need. The innocent archetype will trust people whether or not that trust leads them towards their own betterment or destruction. For example, an innocent will trust strangers and will not usually question it until it's too late. The innocent needs to take up the challenge of stepping out of his or her comfort zone. Being surrounded with unfamiliarity will allow room for the innocent to develop himself or herself. The Wizard of Oz and Labyrinth are archetypal stories.
Turn back, Sarah. Turn back before it's too late.
This form of story can be traced as far back as ancient Greece. Let's take a look at the story of Persephone and Hades. Bear in mind that there are small details within this story that change depending on where you're reading the story from. Persephone is the daughter of Zeus, the chief god, and her mother, Demeter, is the goddess of agriculture. In the Homeric poem, Hymn to Demeter, the story goes like this. One day, as Persephone was gathering flowers in the Nysian meadow with her maidens, she wandered apart from the group, ensnared by the sudden blooming of a glorious, fragrant flower. Some say it was the narcissus. As she reached out to pluck it, the ground below her feet opened up and Hades in his 4-horse golden chariot appeared before her in all his power and majesty. He snatched her and took her with him to the underworld to be his wife and queen. Persephone becomes queen of the underworld. Upon learning of this abduction, her mother, Demeter, in her misery became unconcerned with the harvest and widespread famine ensued. Zeus intervened, commanding Hades to release Persephone to her mother. But because Persephone had eaten a single pomegranate seed in the underworld, she could not be completely freed and had to remain 1/3 of the year with Hades. Persephone was taken during the months of autumn and winter, when the land is not fertile and does not give crops. Whenever Persephone went to Olympus to live with her mother, Demeter would shine with happiness and the land would become fertile and fruitful again. These were the months of spring and summer. Just like a seed, Persephone spends a few months of the year below the earth. This is the period of Demeter's grief, which coincides with the dark winter months. However, when the time comes for Persephone to go back to her mother, Demeter brings back the light and the warmth, and the earth rejoices in abundance.
I have fought my way here to the castle beyond the Goblin City.
So, how does this story of Persephone relate to Sarah's story in the Labyrinth? Both Sarah and Persephone are presented to us at the beginning of their stories as girls who are sheltered from the world, innocent and untouched by malevolence. This changed once they were both taken to the underworld. Jareth is an accurate representation of Hades. Similar to Hades, Jareth wants Sarah all to himself and does not want to let go of her. However, I should mention that Jareth initially told Sarah to forget about the baby. This would suggest that the Goblin King might not have been interested with her at the time. As the story goes on, it would appear that Jareth begins to seek after her, much like Hades did with Persephone. Persephone becomes queen of the underworld. This opportunity is offered to Sarah, but she does not take it. Upon returning home, Persephone is different from how she was before. Similarly, Sarah has also changed as a person. In some versions of the myth, Persephone is named Kor, or Kora, meaning the maiden. The name Kor actually correlates with the words of Carl Jung. The maiden is often described as not altogether human in the usual sense. She is either of unknown or peculiar origin, or she looks strange or undergoes strange experiences from which one is forced to infer the maiden's extraordinary myth-like nature. The maiden's helplessness exposes her to all sorts of dangers, for instance of being devoured by reptiles or ritually slaughtered like a beast of sacrifice. Demeter and Kor, mother and daughter, extend the feminine consciousness both upwards and downwards. They add an older and younger, stronger and weaker dimension to it, and widen out the narrowly limited conscious mind bound in space and time, giving it intimations of greater and more comprehensive personality, which has a share in the eternal course of things. Both Demeter and Persephone are seen to a varying degree within Sarah throughout her journey in the underworld. Sarah begins her story as Persephone, but becomes more mature throughout her journey in the labyrinth. Sarah becomes a stronger person, which carries with it certain characteristics of Demeter. Although Sarah becomes more mature, it comes at the cost of her now desiring the underworld. This is demonstrated when Sarah finds Hoggle in the mirror and says that she needs him. Persephone was given a pomegranate to eat, which resulted in her desiring to return to the underworld. It could be that the writers gave Sarah a peach to eat because they wanted to correlate a pomegranate with a peach, but I could be reaching. In any case, I don't believe that the peach is what gave Sarah the desire to return to the labyrinth. I think it's the friends that she made there which gave her that desire. However, I do believe the idea of giving Sarah a piece of fruit derived from the story of Persephone.
I do believe in spooks. I do.
Let's take a look at the Cowardly Lion, Scarecrow, and Tin Man. They are nearly perfect examples of supporting characters. A well-written supporting character will have a character arc, a point of view, and clear personality traits. In many cases, they will be the types of characters a reader might recognize from their own life, and, like main characters, they will grow and change over the course of the storyline. Scarecrow seeks a brain, Tin Man seeks a heart, and Lion seeks courage. All three have clearly defined motives. Tin Man is more logical, Scarecrow is more emotional, and Lion is frightened often. All three have unique personality traits. Each one of them completes their arc by the end of the film and change as a result. Unfortunately, the same can't be said for Ludo and Sir Didymus. Hoggle is the most complex of the three.
What did you expect?
He takes on a similar role to the Cowardly Lion, but they are very different as characters. To give an example, the Cowardly Lion is often frightened and only seems to act in a brave manner when his friends force him into that position. Hoggle, on the other hand, is never forced into a position by his friends to act brave. In fact, he willingly throws himself into danger towards the end of the story. Ludo is an emotional creature, whose goal could be to find friendship, but unfortunately has no clearly defined personality. What does Ludo want? What struggle does he face? The goal of looking for friendship is never clearly specified either. Hoggle states that he has never been someone's friend before.
I ain't never been no one's friend before.
He also states that he has lost his only friend after contemplating his actions. Friendship is clearly something Hoggle desires. The closest Ludo gets to a motive is when he says this.
Friend?
After Sarah's response, he begins to act as though he was happy that he made a friend.
Sarah, friend.
But he also says this later in the story.
Rock's friend.
Rocks are his friends? Based off what the story tells us, Ludo is friends with rocks. Not living ones, plain, ordinary rocks. This would mean that Ludo's bar for friendship is very low. He doesn't even act this happy when Sir Didymus calls him his brother.
Let us be brothers henceforth, and fight for the right as one.
Ludo, get brother.
Ludo has no arc, and has no goal. Sir Didymus has a motive, unlike Ludo. His motive when we first meet him is to prevent anyone from crossing a bridge that falls apart the moment he begins to tap it. However, we know nothing about his point of view. If we look at Hoggle, he works for Jareth and is terrified of him. He also describes him as a rat. This would imply that he does not serve Jareth out of loyalty but fear. Ludo is strung up by goblins, and it's suggested that they intend to eat him. Sir Didymus explains that he is guarding the bridge, but why? It's clear that the Goblin King has the power to send people there, and yet Sir Didymus displays no sign of loyalty or disloyalty to any particular side. The only reason he fights against the goblins, as far as we know, is because he wants to protect Sarah. I am making this observation based on the information given to us by the story. Sir Didymus possesses an arc, but one that comes to its conclusion within minutes. He will not allow anyone to cross the bridge. He engages a group of travelers who wish to pass. He begins to duel one of them and eventually concedes. Finally, he gives them permission to cross. Thus, his arc is fulfilled. This leads me to believe that the character of Sir Didymus serves no grand purpose in this story. In contrast, Hoggle's knowledge of the labyrinth is useful. He rescues Sarah as well as his friends. Ludo does not receive a character arc, but still serves a purpose. His ability to summon rocks saves Sarah and his companions. When we meet Sir Didymus, he presents himself as an obstacle to overcome. He is potentially responsible for the bridge collapsing as well. At the most, we can say that he serves the story by distracting the goblins for his companions to retreat.
Ambrosius, can we please talk about this?
But if we removed him from the plot entirely, almost nothing changes. We can assume that either Ludo or Hoggle would have distracted the goblins in his place. I think the character of Sir Didymus is unique and entertaining, but it's unfortunate that he was not introduced sooner in the story and given an opportunity to be more useful. It was important for the writers to put him in a situation where his skills would have been useful for the group. Unfortunately, they did not provide him with that opportunity to prove himself. For example, what if Sarah, Ludo, Hoggle, and Sir Didymus encountered a skunk that also carried a melee weapon? It would have provided Sir Didymus with an opportunity to prove his capabilities as a swordsman, and the smell of the skunk would not affect him. This would not only put him in a position to be useful, but it would also make him necessary to the plot.
Just let me rule you, and you can have everything that you want.
So now we have two stories. We have the Labyrinth, and we have the story of the Wizard of Oz. Both of them have their roots in Greek mythology. But of those two stories, which one of them has the antagonist that best represents Hades? I do not believe that Oz, the great and powerful, represents Hades. In fact, I don't believe that Hades is represented within Dorothy's story at all, and I'll tell you my reasoning why I believe this. In the story of Persephone and Hades, Hades actively seeks out Persephone and takes her to the underworld where he makes her his bride. In The Wizard of Oz, Dorothy isn't carried off by a guy who wants to marry her. She's carried off by a natural disaster. The great and powerful Wizard of Oz did not bring Dorothy to Oz, neither did he want to speak with her. Actually, Oz attempted to frighten Dorothy away. Much later in her story, Oz is revealed to be nothing more than a common man hiding behind a curtain. I cannot overstate that this is very different from Hades. Hades would not have rejected Persephone, neither is he a common man in disguise. For this reason, I do not believe that Hades is incorporated within the Wizard of Oz. Just to clarify, this does not mean that The Wizard of Oz does not contain deep psychological meaning within the story. The Wizard of Oz is a very profound story, which is why it's been remembered and retold 120 years after its publication. In Sarah's case, she is transported to the outskirts of the maze by Jareth. He is displayed as charismatic, good-looking, and confident. There is a sexual component of his character, which is displayed at several moments throughout the story. This, unlike The Wizard of Oz, bears a strong resemblance to Hades. Through her time spent in the underworld, Sarah becomes more mature and eventually confronts Jareth.
You have no power over me.
Upon completing her journey, she returns home. But before the story finishes, she sees Hoggle in the mirror. She tells him that she needs him, which results in many of the creatures from the labyrinth being transported to her room, which is when they begin to celebrate. There is a similarity between the end of Persephone's story. After eating the seeds of a pomegranate, she felt the need to return to the underworld for a third of the year. But, just as Hades is missing from the story of the Wizard of Oz, Demeter is missing from the labyrinth. In mythology, upon learning of the abduction of Persephone, Demeter, in her misery, became unconcerned with the harvest, which resulted in widespread famine. She was distraught over the loss of her daughter. Aunt Em plays this part very well in The Wizard of Oz. In fact, I would go so far as to say that Aunt Em, the West Witch, and the South Witch are a trinity of sorts of what Demeter is from mythology. Aunt Em represents agriculture. Glinda represents positive motherly characteristics, as well as rebirth. The Wicked Witch represents negative motherly characteristics, as well as death. Sarah's stepmother does not represent Demeter in the same way that Aunt Em does. Not only did she play a small role in the story in general, but the audience has shown that Sarah acts dismissively towards her stepmom. This is very different from the relationship between Demeter and Persephone. If we look at the relationship between Dorothy and her aunt, Dorothy possessed a great deal of respect for her. Although Sarah listens to her stepmother at one point in the story when she tells Merlin to go into the garage, she is not shown to be close with her to the same degree that Dorothy and Aunt Emily are. At one point in The Wizard of Oz, Dorothy is held captive by the Wicked Witch of the West. Dorothy cries and wishes that her Aunt Em would comfort her. Sarah never behaves in this way despite finding herself in many difficult situations. She never becomes overwhelmed to the point of crying.
But anyway, Toto, we're home. Home. And this is my room. And you're all here. And I'm not going to leave here ever, ever again.
With all that in mind, what can we conclude from The Wizard of Oz and The Labyrinth? Each has their strengths and weaknesses. The Wizard of Oz succeeds in capturing the relationship between the mother figure and the daughter figure, but does not contain an accurate portrayal of a Hades-like figure. The Labyrinth, on the other hand, succeeds in capturing the relationship between Sarah and Jareth in a way that mirrors the relationship between Persephone and Hades. However, this story does not contain an accurate portrayal of the Demeter mother figure.
You remind me of the babe. Babe with the power. Power of voodoo. You do. Remind me of the babe.
From what we see, Jareth, unlike Hades and the Wicked Witch, seems to possess limitless abilities, magical or otherwise, that are unique to him specifically. Throughout the movie, he has displayed time and time again how powerful he is. He can turn himself into an owl, he can create illusions, transport Sarah to an unearthly world, disappear at will, control time, create objects of terror in an instant. He is privy to information he shouldn't know. He can produce hallucinogenic foods, control the ground itself, can fabricate alternate realities, walk upside down. He is the king of goblins, good with kids, and on top of all this, he can sing as well as dance. But let's rewind to when Jareth and Sarah first meet. Jareth removes Toby at Sarah's request. When she wishes the goblins would take her brother away, she comes to regret her decision almost immediately. Based off her reaction, the audience can assume she wouldn't have wished something like this if she knew that this is what would have really happened. Sarah, in the beginning, is presented to us as immature. When she wishes Toby would disappear, it's said by her with the intent to avoid responsibility. This request of hers is what facilitates Jareth's motive for the rest of the film. That motive is to either prevent Sarah from taking responsibility or to remove responsibility from her life. He does exactly as she asks and removes responsibility from her by taking away her brother. After this, she regrets her words and begs for him to return her baby brother. And of course, Sarah is powerless against Jareth in this moment. She can't do anything to get her brother back outside of begging Jareth to return him. Now, let's skip ahead to the face-off between Sarah and Jareth towards the end of the film. He states that he is growing tired of living up to her expectations of him. He then presents her with an opportunity to see her dreams, avoid responsibility, and avoid growing into a mature adult. How is this possible? How is Jareth so powerful? And why would he even give Sarah an opportunity to retrieve her brother in the first place? These are excellent questions. This is made possible by the type of story that The Labyrinth is. The Labyrinth is allegorical by design. Ordinarily, the antagonist of any story is provided with limits. For a quick comparison, let's look at Darth Vader. In the Star Wars original trilogy, Darth Vader is established to not only possess skill in melee combat, but also piloting. His knowledge of the Force is extensive, but is not limitless. He is still a human and must follow the same rules as other humans according to the films. If Darth Vader wants to go somewhere, he can't just appear there. He must take a ship and travel there just like everyone else. Is he a tremendous Force user? Absolutely. But despite being in the presence of his own daughter, he is unaware of their relation because he lacks the knowledge. These rules are important and necessary when trying to tell a story. If Darth Vader could just break these rules anytime he wished, then there would be no story. This is why I am so heavily critical of the sequels in the Star Wars franchise. Not only do they frequently break their own rules, but they use the Force to casually explain away plot holes. So why is it that in a story like Star Wars, Darth Vader has limits, while someone like Jareth in The Labyrinth does not? This is because The Labyrinth, just like The Wizard of Oz, takes place in the mind of a teenage girl. Dorothy and Sarah have the power to return home whenever they wish, but do not realize it until the both of them have learned to not take their lives back home for granted. Therefore, Jareth is simultaneously the antagonist of the story, but also the embodiment of Sarah's fantasies. He is essentially a physical manifestation of her own making. He is intelligent, attractive, powerful, and unpredictable. He is everything that she could ever want in a man, and Jareth is conscious of this. This is why he says he is tired of living up to her expectations.
I am exhausted from living up to your expectations.
He is self-aware and recognizes his role in her life. Although he is tired of living up to her expectations, he still needs her. Without her, he falls out of existence. This is why he asks her to fear him and love him, do as he says, and in return he will be her slave. He is offering her essentially a symbiotic relationship. It's in his best interest to do as she wants, but also prevent her from maturing so he may exist. This is tempting to Sarah, but she can no longer afford to live her life in a fantasy. She has decided by the end of the film that she must become mature. She inevitably makes the decision that the fantasies of her own creation will only delay her maturity into a woman. And by the end of the film, she recognizes that maturity does not begin until a person decides to postpone immediate pleasures for long-term values. I can certainly understand why so many people find this film to be unusual, and why it was received so poorly upon its release. From the surface level, there are many things which seem out of place and jarring upon first viewing. When I saw this film for the first time, it was when I was young, and I really enjoyed it. Had you asked me at the time why I enjoyed it, I probably would have given a surface level answer. Before making this video, I had always wanted to examine this film at a deeper level. For some reason, it was important for me to understand why Labyrinth had garnered such a large fandom over the decades. Below the surface, this film is an allegory about a young woman's journey into adulthood. Over the course of that journey, Sarah learns that accepting responsibility and the realities of life are part of becoming an adult. I'll be honest, it's actually really hard for me to believe that I've actually finished this video. There have been so many things getting in the way of it constantly. Not only the copyright issues, which are crazy to deal with, but in my personal life, I've been exceptionally busy. I've had to undergo a few procedures and doctor visits, and then there's been the holidays and work and family issues, you name it. I am very, very grateful for those of you who have waited so long for this to come out. And yeah, I hope that this video was able to satisfy those who have waited for so long. And hopefully I can continue to make more videos that you guys enjoy. I have a couple that are planned out, but as always, it's going to take a little while to make them, but hopefully not as long as some of the other videos. In any case, I hope that you've all been well. Feel free to subscribe if you haven't, or share this video with some of your friends. I have a subscribe star that you're welcome to contribute to, or if you don't, then that's okay too. I'm gonna continue making content regardless. And God willing, I'll be able to keep making videos that you guys enjoy. All right, I'm officially ending the video now, so I will talk to you guys later.